I'm Claire Ashford, 32, and 3 weeks ago, at my father's retirement party, he gave me the final reason to leave forever. Picture a glittering country club ballroom, 200 guests in sharp suits and silk dresses, with champagne flowing like a golden river. My father, Victor Ashford, stood on stage with a microphone, smiling warmly for the crowd while something cold hid behind his eyes. He introduced relatives one by one, praising each name, each success, each polished life that made our family look perfect. Then the spotlight found me, and his smile sharpened like glass as he said, "This is my daughter, Claire Ashford," he added. "No degree, no future, just someone who freeloads off the family." And the room exploded with easy, cruel laughter. I did not flinch, did not cry, did not break the way they expected. I simply lifted my champagne glass and kept smiling. Then I said, "Cheers! This is the last time any of you will ever see me." And suddenly, the ballroom lost all sound. I turned, walked out in silence, and left 200 witnesses staring at the daughter they thought would always stay small. What happened after that night changed everything. And I'm telling you now because some exits are really delayed beginnings. Before I go deeper, stay with this story until the end, because what Victor Ashford discovered later was worse than humiliation. If you have ever been the family joke, the invisible one, or the child they underestimated, you may hear yourself in me tonight. And if this story reaches something buried in you, remember that silence can hide pain, but it can also hide power. Now let me take you back 12 years, to the day my future was stripped away and my real life quietly began. Back then, the Ashford family in Fairfield, Connecticut looked respectable, polished, and comfortably above ordinary problems. We had a 6-bedroom colonial home, 2 acres of trimmed land, a luxury car in the driveway, and club memberships. My father, Victor Ashford, ran a mid-sized logistics company and carried himself like a man who believed control was virtue. From the outside, we looked stable, successful, and admirable, the kind of family neighbors pointed at with quiet envy. But beautiful houses are good at hiding emotional winters, and ours had been cold for longer than anyone admitted. My mother, Sophia Ashford, died when I was 8, and cancer took her so fast I barely learned how to grieve. I cannot always remember her face clearly, but I remember her hands, soft and warm, always reaching back for mine. 2 years later, Victor Ashford remarried Vanessa Ashford, and she came with a son from her first marriage. His name was Ethan Cole, 3 years older than me, already confident, already practiced at taking up every room. Within months, they were no longer new additions to the family. They became the center of it, the default story. I was still there, technically included, but only in the way furniture belongs to a house without ever being thanked. No one beat me, no one screamed at me, and that almost made it harder to explain what was happening. I was not openly abused. I was simply edited out, reduced, overlooked, and quietly replaced in every meaningful way. When Ethan Cole earned praise for his grades, the room brightened. When I did well, the subject changed. When he turned 16, he got a new car and a future everyone discussed with pride as if it were destiny. When I needed something, I was usually handed what was already used, already unwanted, already meant for someone else. Ethan Cole was introduced as the future of the company, while I was treated like an unresolved inconvenience. My father never had to shout. Neglect can be more precise than anger when it is practiced for years. He looked through me the way people look through windows, as if the real point was always somewhere beyond me. I learned early how to make myself quiet, useful, undemanding, and invisible enough to survive inside that house. But one person truly saw me, and that was my grandmother, Evelyn Ashford, my father's mother. Every Sunday, Evelyn Ashford called to ask about school, my thoughts, my friends, and the dreams I never said aloud at home. She used to tell me, "You are underestimated, Claire Ashford, but that does not mean you are small." She saw the effort behind my silence, and she spoke to me as if my future were still something alive. I did not know then that she would one day protect me in a way no one else in my family ever did. I only knew that her voice made me feel visible, and that feeling was rare enough to remember like treasure. By 20, I had built a version of hope again, fragile but real, and I was determined not to lose it. I was a sophomore, a business major with strong grades, a scholarship application, and a summer program dream in London. For once, my life felt like something I was shaping with my own hands instead of surviving by instinct. Then Victor Ashford called me home on a Wednesday and said we needed a family meeting. In our house, those two words never meant love, compromise, or support. They usually meant sacrifice dressed as logic. I found him in his study, framed by dark wood, leather, certificates, and the kind of power he worshipped. Vanessa Ashford stood beside him with one hand on his shoulder, already aligned before a single word was spoken. He did not look at me when he began, and that detail told me almost everything before the sentence ended. He said the family needed to make difficult choices because Ethan Cole had been accepted into an elite MBA program. I felt my body go still, because I already knew whose future had just become negotiable and whose did not. He explained that they could not support both my tuition and Ethan Cole's next step, so I would pause school. Not cancel forever, he said, just take a break, as if stolen years could be folded neatly and returned untouched. Vanessa Ashford smiled softly and said a girl did not need advanced education to build a good life. She said I would find a nice husband someday, and that mattered more than any degree I could chase. I sat frozen, not because I was shocked, but because a small foolish part of me had still hoped. I reminded Victor Ashford that he had once promised my dying mother he would support my education. His jaw tightened, and he said circumstances changed, as if broken promises were just another business adjustment. He said he would make it up to me when things were better, but even then, I knew he never would. Later, a cousin accidentally revealed there had been enough money all along. They just chose not to spend it on me. That truth hurt less like a wound and more like a sentence being finally read aloud in full. I did not scream, beg, or make a scene that day, because I had already spent years training myself not to. I nodded, left the room, and made a private promise that no one would ever again decide my worth for me. That night unpacked the parts of my life they had not yet taken, and planned a future without permission. I moved to Boston with $2,000, a suitcase, and a level of silence my family had taught me well. My first apartment was a tiny studio above a laundromat, where the radiator clanged and the walls never held sound. I ate ramen for dinner, saved day-old bagels from the cafe where I worked mornings, and counted every dollar twice. It was difficult, lonely, and humiliating in ordinary, practical ways, but at least the pain belonged to a life I had chosen. Rock bottom has one mercy. Once you are there, fear loses some of its power because there is nowhere lower to fall. I stopped waiting for rescue and started learning what survival looked like when it came from discipline instead of family. That was the first season of my real education, and no one in Fairfield would have recognized it as success. I found an entry-level job as an administrative assistant at a small logistics company that paid little but opened a door. The owner, Howard Bennett, was gruff, practical, and allergic to excuses, which made his praise feel unusually honest. One day he told me I had a real brain and asked why I was hiding it behind clerical work. No one in my family had ever said anything like that to me, and I carried his words for months. So I stayed late, learned every system, every process, and every operational weakness the company kept patching by habit. At night, I took free courses online in supply chain management, operations, and business fundamentals until exhaustion felt normal. Some people have prestigious universities. I had fluorescent office lights, open browser tabs, and stubbornness. I did not call home, did not ask for money, and did not give my family the satisfaction of watching me fail. When a birthday card arrived with a small family check tucked inside, I tore it apart and threw it away. I would rather live on less than let them pretend they were still supporting the daughter they had abandoned. Years passed that way, built from routine, hunger, discipline, and the steady refusal to disappear a second time. 4 years after leaving Connecticut, I had saved enough to start something of my own, even if it was still fragile. I founded Meridian Consulting with one laptop, one rented desk, and a level of determination that no resume could explain. In the beginning, it was just me, a borrowed conference room, and endless cold professionalism. I kept my personal name off everything public, and that secrecy was not paranoia. It was pattern recognition. I knew my family well enough to understand that if they found my success, they would either claim it or poison it. So contracts ran through the company name, paperwork through lawyers, and my image stayed away from every public profile. I built the company in silence because silence was the only language my family had ever forced me to master. But silence, used properly, can become strategy, and strategy can become protection, and protection can become power. The work itself was not glamorous, but it was profitable, technical, and difficult enough that results mattered more than charm. Meridian specialized in logistics optimization, the invisible machinery that keeps companies moving and profits from collapsing. We improved routing, warehouse flow, carrier negotiations, and the kind of operational structure most executives ignore until it fails. I was good at it because I understood overlooked systems, and I understood what breaks when no one pays attention. In a strange way, my childhood had prepared me perfectly to see hidden weaknesses before others did. Meridian slowly grew from survival business to credible firm, then from credible firm to something quietly formidable. Each contract felt less like money and more like evidence that I had not been who my family said I was. I was not the girl with no future. I was a woman building one from the ruins they had handed me, and still, even as success arrived, I kept my name hidden. Because some wars are won by timing, not noise. Unseen. The world saw Meridian Consulting. Almost nobody saw Claire Ashford standing behind it. That anonymity would later save me, protect me, and destroy the lie my family had built about me. 2 years ago, when I was 30, Evelyn Ashford died, and I returned to Connecticut for her funeral. I sat in the back pew while Victor Ashford praised her devotion to family in words that tasted false even from afar. I kept to myself at the reception, and no one really noticed, which suited me perfectly. 3 days later, I received a call from a Boston estate lawyer I had never met before. Her name was Amelia Carter, and she told me she represented my grandmother's separate private estate. She said Evelyn Ashford had created a trust in my name 8 years earlier and ordered that no family member be told. For a second, I thought I had misheard her because that level of secret protection did not fit my life. Then Amelia Carter told me the trust held $800,000, and I nearly dropped my phone. She also said my grandmother had left a letter, and I asked her to read it aloud immediately. In that letter, Evelyn Ashford said she knew what had been done to me, especially the theft of my education. She wrote that she had argued with Victor Ashford until words failed, but he had never truly listened. She told me the money was mine with no strings, no guilt, and no family conditions attached. She said I should build the life they tried to take from me and never let anyone define my worth again. She ended by saying that when they finally saw my value, it would already be too late for them. I cried after that call, not from grief alone, but from the shock of being believed so completely. Evelyn Ashford had seen the truth of my life and quietly prepared a weapon made of love and foresight. I used part of the trust to expand Meridian and kept the rest untouched like emergency oxygen. I hoped I would never need that reserve, but some part of me always knew the day might come. That day began 3 weeks ago, when a gold-embossed envelope arrived inviting me to Victor Ashford's retirement party. I almost threw it away, but memory, anger, and Evelyn Ashford's voice stopped my hand. By then, Meridian had 15 employees, millions in annual revenue, and an office in Back Bay with a view I had earned. I wore fine things sometimes, not to impress anyone, but because buying them myself felt like reclaiming language. The funniest part, if pain can be funny, was that one of Meridian's largest clients was my father's company. Victor Ashford had spent 3 years relying on operational systems my team designed without ever knowing his daughter owned them. All contact went through account managers, legal representatives, and my CFO, Julian Cross, never directly through me. The contract with his company generated huge savings for them and held together nearly half of their operational efficiency. At industry events, Victor Ashford sometimes praised Meridian publicly, never realizing he was praising the daughter he dismissed. The invitation to his retirement party felt less like family outreach and more like fate sharpening a blade. I did not go because I wanted forgiveness. I went because I understood my father's habits too well. I knew he would eventually do something unforgivable, and I wanted to be present when the final line was crossed. SV P'd yes with a calm hand, and the certainty that this night would close something old forever. I chose a simple black designer dress, my grandmother's pearl earrings, and confidence I had sown from my own labor. Every item I wore had been purchased by me, and that mattered more than labels or anyone's opinion. When I arrived, the country club looked exactly as I remembered: expensive, polished, and emotionally airless. Crystal chandeliers glowed above the same old crowd of wealth, ambition, networking smiles, and inherited self-importance. Vanessa Ashford intercepted me at the entrance with a smile that felt practiced enough to survive any truth. Her eyes swept over my clothes before she welcomed me, already measuring whether I looked acceptable for the room. She said Victor Ashford had not been sure I would have something appropriate to wear, and I almost laughed. I thanked her for the concern, because sometimes politeness is simply contempt dressed in silk gloves. Inside, 200 guests moved through light and music, while I stepped quietly into a room that never expected me to rise. Bankers, lawyers, executives, and politicians filled the ballroom, many of them familiar from old dinner parties at our house. None of them recognized me, which was perfect, because anonymity is useful when truth is preparing an entrance. Ethan Cole swept past with a glamorous blonde at his side and did not even glance in my direction. He was boasting about his vision for the company's future, radiating confidence with very little substance behind it. My place card put me at table 14 near the service entrance, far from the family and even farther from respect. I noticed the insult, filed it away, and accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. Across the room, Victor Ashford caught my eye and gave me a brief nod that felt more dismissive than welcoming. I took my seat and did what invisibility had trained me to do well. I watched and listened. From near the bar, I heard Victor Ashford talking to business associates about restructuring, partnerships, and strong operational performance. Then he praised Meridian Consulting, calling it transformative, and saying the company had become the backbone of their operation. A silver-haired executive asked who actually owned Meridian because no one seemed able to reach the leadership directly. Victor Ashford shrugged and admitted he had never met the owners, but he did not care as long as results kept coming. I lifted my glass to hide my smile, because sometimes irony is too sharp to show openly. My phone buzzed with a message from Julian Cross, my CFO, about the renewal documents from my father's company. He wrote that they wanted another 5 years and asked whether I had reached a decision yet. I told him I would answer by the end of the week, though part of me already knew tonight would decide it. If Meridian walked away, Victor Ashford's company would lose nearly half its operational efficiency almost overnight. In logistics, that is not a temporary setback. It is the beginning of institutional collapse, dressed in spreadsheets. Until that moment, I had tried to keep business separate from family damage, even if the arrangement was deeply ironic. But watching my father bask in success, built partly on my hidden work, changed the balance inside me. I realized this party might not just end a relationship, it might also determine the future of his company. That knowledge sat in my chest like a quiet engine, building pressure. While the room kept smiling, I went to the bar for another glass, or maybe just to move before anger sharpened into something visible. That was where the next round of family theater found me, right on schedule and wearing concern-like perfume. Diana Moore, Vanessa Ashford's younger sister, spotted me first and approached with the eager pity of a practiced gossip. She said she had almost not recognized me, then asked if I was still in Boston doing whatever it was I did. I told her I worked in consulting and supply chain management, and she repeated it like it sounded unserious. She asked whether I was seeing anyone, then reminded me that I was 32, as if time itself were accusing me. Before I could reply, Peter Moore joined us and said not everyone was meant for traditional success. In one sentence, he managed to insult my career, my life, and my pace, as though he were being generous. Then Diana Moore lowered her voice and mentioned my supposed emotional difficulties after leaving school. She said it was brave of me to attend despite my mental health struggles, and suddenly the pattern became clear. Victor Ashford had briefed them before I arrived and fed them the version of me he wanted repeated in whispers. I felt my grip tighten on the champagne glass, not from pain, but from the audacity of the fabrication. I told them calmly that I was doing better than ever and had never been stronger in my life. They exchanged those sad little looks people use when they may think condescension counts as compassion. I excused myself before the conversation could become uglier, but the damage had already become information. My father was not only humiliating me privately, he had built a preloaded narrative for the whole room. That meant whatever came next would not simply be another cruel moment. It would be a final deliberate performance. I stepped onto the terrace, let the cool September air hit my face, and watched the golf course darken. For a moment, I let the quiet settle me, because some decisions deserve a last calm breath before they are made. Then I heard footsteps behind me and knew before he spoke that the evening was not finished with me yet. Ethan Cole came out onto the terrace with that heavy contempt he had carried since childhood. He called me the prodigal daughter and stood close enough that his expensive cologne felt like an intrusion. He said our father's speech was coming and asked whether I planned to cause some dramatic scene tonight. I asked why I would do that, and he answered with the confidence of someone who has never tested his own beliefs. He said I had always been jealous, especially after the tuition decision and my move to Boston. According to him, I had disappeared like a wounded animal because I could not accept his rightful place above me. I turned to face him fully, taking in the suit, the watch, and the arrogance inheritance had tailored to fit him. He said he heard I had started some little company and laughed at how quickly he expected it to fail. He predicted I would come crawling back to Victor Ashford for help the moment reality broke me the way he believed it would. Then he called me weak, as if repetition could turn an old lie into permanent truth. I could have told him everything right there, but revelations need the right room and the right silence. So I only said that he could believe whatever made him feel better, because the truth would arrive soon enough. I started to walk past him, then stopped long enough to tell him one thing very clearly. I said that after tonight, he would wish he had treated me differently, and his laugh followed me indoors. He thought I was bluffing, posturing, or finally losing control, and that misunderstanding protected me for 5 more minutes. The ballroom lights dimmed just then, and the crowd turned toward the stage with eager applause. Victor Ashford climbed the steps like a man greeting his own legend, warm in public and cruel in private. I returned to my table, sat very still, and waited for the moment my family had spent years rehearsing. My father thanked business partners, employees, mentors, luck, timing, and anyone else who could polish the story of his career. He praised Vanessa Ashford for supporting him through late nights and business trips, and the room applauded dutifully. Then he announced that Ethan Cole would take over as CEO in January and called him the future of the company. People stood for that, smiling as if they were witnessing a royal succession rather than ordinary corporate vanity. I watched Ethan Cole wave at the room, soaking in a legacy he had never built alone. Then Victor Ashford looked toward me, and something mean entered his expression with terrible familiarity. He said, "And of course my daughter, Claire Ashford." And the spotlight swung across the ballroom to my table. 200 faces turned toward me, curious, amused, and ready for a joke I had not agreed to be inside. Then he said I had no degree, no real career, and simply lived off the family without direction. He added that maybe one day I would at least find a rich husband to take care of me. The room erupted in laughter, full-bodied laughter, the kind people allow themselves when cruelty is socially approved. I remained perfectly still, because calm is a frightening thing when a crowd expects collapse. I waited for the last laugh to fade, and when the room thinned into silence, I stood up slowly. I could feel 200 people staring, some pitying me, some expecting a public breakdown, some simply entertained. I picked up my champagne glass and raised it toward Victor Ashford with complete steadiness in my hand. I congratulated him on 40 years in business and said he had taught me a great deal about sacrifice and loyalty. Then I said, "Cheers. This is the last time any of you will ever see me," and set the glass down. I took my bag, turned from the spotlight, and walked toward the exit with my spine straight and my head high. My heels clicked across the hardwood floor, the only sound in that massive room now stripped of laughter. No one stopped me, and no one knew how to fix what had just broken in front of them. Behind me came only gasps, whispers, and the heavy silence of people realizing they had applauded the wrong kind of joke. I pushed through the doors into the night air and inhaled the first full breath I had taken in years. I crossed the parking lot toward my black Tesla, keys already in my hand, pulse steady at last. Then I heard Vanessa Ashford shouting my name as she hurried after me in bright anger and cracked control. She grabbed my arm, spun me around, and demanded to know if I understood what I had just done. She said I had humiliated my father in front of everyone, as if I had invented the cruelty instead of receiving it. I looked at her hand until she released me, then asked quietly whether she had the story backwards. Seconds later, Victor Ashford reached us with thunder on his face and panic hiding beneath it. He told me to go back inside immediately and apologize, speaking low because he knew the windows were full of witnesses. I said no, and the word hung between us with more force than any scream I could have given him. He said this was not a negotiation because he was my father, still trying to govern me with a title he had emptied. I asked whether he meant I should return and keep smiling while he turned me into a punchline for 200 guests. He claimed it had only been a joke, but I told him it was the truth of how he saw me. I opened my car door, and that was when he delivered his oldest threat in its purest form. He warned that if I left now, I would be done, with no family, no support, and nothing from them again. I almost laughed because they had cut me off 12 years earlier, and only lacked the courage to say it directly. I told him he had ended things long ago, and tonight I was simply giving the silence its real name. I got into the driver's seat, started the car, and said goodbye without softness or hesitation. Then I drove away from Fairfield, from the club, and from the stage where my family had finally overplayed its hand. About 20 minutes later, I pulled into a rest stop and sat with both hands on the wheel, breathing. There, in the hum of the idling car, I let myself admit how many people would understand this kind of wound. Not the ballroom version, maybe, but the feeling of being the family disappointment, the whispered problem, the easy target. If you have ever sat through a gathering while someone made you the joke, then you know that kind of silence. If you have ever smiled through pain because reacting would only prove their version of you, then you know me. I wanted anyone hearing my story to understand that this kind of cruelty is real, even when it leaves no bruises. And I wanted them to know that what happened next was not chaos or revenge, but consequence finally arriving on time. Because after that party, Victor Ashford still believed he could control the story, and that was his next mistake. The morning after, I woke in my Boston apartment lighter than I had been in years, but I also knew better. Families like mine do not release control gracefully. They spin, distort, recruit allies, and rush to name the villain first. What they did not know was that I held something they could not publicly twist without exposing themselves. The week that followed began with messages, all carrying concern on the surface and manipulation underneath. That was when I learned just how quickly my father had moved to protect his reputation from the truth. Cousins, aunts, and old family friends started texting me that they had heard I was struggling and needed help. One message said my father believed I had some kind of breakdown at the party and wanted only what was best for me. Another urged me to apologize, come home, and let the family support me through my difficult emotional state. The narrative was already circulating. Poor, unstable Claire Ashford, jealous and fragile, embarrassing a patient, loving father. I did not answer any of them because false stories starve faster when they are not fed by panic. On Tuesday, I received a call from a Connecticut number I did not know and answered it anyway. The man introduced himself as Thomas Grayson, a partner at Victor Ashford's company, calling on my father's behalf. He said Richard wanted to mend fences and casually mentioned rumors about my connection to certain business partners. When he referenced Meridian Consulting, cold moved through me because this was no longer family gossip, but active investigation. He claimed someone thought they had seen me near Meridian's offices once and wanted to clear the air. I asked what kind of rumors he meant, keeping my voice neutral while my mind raced through possibilities. He tried to sound casual, but the fishing was obvious, and the hook was already glittering in open water. I denied having anything to discuss with my father and ended the call before the trap could settle. They were getting closer to the truth than I had expected, and waiting any longer no longer felt strategic. While I weighed my next step in Boston, a different kind of panic was beginning to spread in Connecticut. Later, I learned what happened in Victor Ashford's boardroom after that phone call and why his tone changed so fast. He entered what should have been a routine quarterly meeting and found a crisis already sitting at the table. His CFO handed him a folder and said they had a serious problem with Meridian Consulting and the renewal timeline. The contract had only 6 months left. Extension offers had gone unanswered, and Meridian's legal team stayed professionally distant. Victor Ashford told them to send another offer, better terms if needed, still believing money could fix anything. The CFO said they had already tried repeatedly and could not get direct access to Meridian's true ownership or leadership. No one at the company had ever actually met the owner, only representatives, account managers, and carefully managed screens. Then came the number that mattered. Without Meridian, they would lose roughly 40% of operational efficiency. Replacing that system would take at least 18 months, maybe more, and the market would not wait politely. Victor Ashford stared at the papers, feeling timing and fear begin to connect in ways he hated. He ordered them to find out who owned Meridian by the end of the week, whatever it required. What he did not know was that the name he was hunting already sat inside his own family history. On Thursday evening, Vanessa Ashford called me with a voice sweet enough to rot if left in the sun. She said they were worried about me and pretended the party had been a misunderstanding caused by nerves and humor. I reminded her exactly what had been said, and she tried to soften it by blaming stress, age, and bad timing. Then she invited me home for dinner with just the four of us, urging a fresh start without mentioning apology. I asked whether Victor Ashford intended to apologize, and the silence before her answer told me everything. She said he wanted to move forward, and I said no because moving forward without truth is just another trap. The next morning, I drove to Amelia Carter's office and told her my family was investigating Meridian's ownership. She did not seem surprised and said my anonymity had always been temporary. The real question was how I wanted this to end. She laid out every document: the contract, renewal clauses, termination rights, trust papers, and the corporate structure protecting me. Meridian could legally end the agreement with 30 days' notice, no penalty, and no realistic exposure if challenged. My grandmother's trust was also sealed away from family claims, precisely because Evelyn Ashford had predicted a day like this. Amelia Carter told me that my grandmother had asked for one thing if that day ever came: do not be cruel. She said the truth itself might be punishment enough, and the older I got, the more I understood that wisdom. That afternoon, I met with Julian Cross in Meridian's conference room and reviewed the numbers one last time. If we ended the contract, Ethan Cole would inherit a company sliding toward operational collapse within weeks of his promotion. Julian Cross asked what kind of person I wanted to be, because power reveals character faster than poverty ever does. I sat with that question and thought about revenge, justice, and the cost of carrying my family forever. In the end, I told him to draft the termination letter, plain and professional, with no emotional language at all. Officially, the reason would be strategic repositioning and changes in Meridian's client portfolio. Nothing more dramatic than that. But I also said I would send Victor Ashford a separate personal letter, because some truths should arrive by hand. That weekend, I wrote and rewrote that letter until anger stripped away and only clarity remained. The first draft was too angry, the second too cold, the third too wounded, and none of them sounded like freedom. The final version was simple. I told him Meridian was mine and that the daughter he mocked had supported his company for years. I explained that I was ending the contract not as revenge, but as a boundary, because boundaries name what damage is no longer allowed. I told him Evelyn Ashford had invested in me when he would not, and that everything I had came without his help. I told him I did not need his apology, his approval, or his understanding. I only needed him to know the truth. Then I signed it Claire Margaret Ashford, using my middle name to honor the only person in that family who had believed me. I included copies of Meridian's incorporation papers showing my name as sole owner, clear enough to end all denial. On Monday at 9, the courier delivered the package to his headquarters and his assistant signed for it. I sat in my office watching the clock and the silence, knowing somewhere in Connecticut, an illusion was shattering in real time. At 10:15, the first missed call from Victor Ashford appeared, and then another after that. By late morning, calls from Ethan Cole and Vanessa Ashford joined his, each more frantic in timing than the last. Texts arrived demanding that I call immediately, asking what this was, insisting it was not funny, begging and threatening at once. I ignored every call because I had spent 12 years waiting for this truth to reach them. They could wait 6 hours. At 2 in the afternoon, my assistant told me 3 family members were in the lobby demanding to see me at once. So they had driven 5 hours to Boston, carried by panic, entitlement, and the first true fear I had ever given them. I checked my reflection, straightened my blazer, and asked that they be sent to Conference Room B in 5 minutes. I chose that room because it had glass walls. My employees could see inside, and witnesses have a civilizing effect. As I walked there, I thought of Evelyn Ashford's last guidance and promised myself I would be honest, not cruel. When I entered, Victor Ashford, Vanessa Ashford, and Ethan Cole stood by the window, staring at my skyline like trespassers. They had never seen me from this angle before, not as the child they dismissed, but as the woman who built the room. Victor Ashford turned first, older than I remembered, and asked in a cracked voice what all of this meant. I greeted them calmly and took the seat at the head of the table, letting the geometry of the room answer part of that question. Ethan Cole started to rant immediately, but I told him to sit down because I would not discuss anything through shouting. The fact that he obeyed told me fear had already entered the room before I did. After a long silence, Victor Ashford called it a misunderstanding and said Meridian could not possibly belong to me. I slid a folder across the table containing registration papers, tax records, and client documentation that proved everything. I told them their company had signed a contract with mine 3 years earlier and praised my work at industry events. Vanessa Ashford went pale and said I did not even have a degree, as if that fact should erase all evidence in front of her. I asked what she thought I was then, a failure, a cautionary tale, a girl forever frozen at 20 in their minds. I reminded them that I had been a 20-year-old forced to sacrifice her education and had built something anyway. Then Victor Ashford did what men like him do when power begins slipping. He offered apology as a transaction. He said he was sorry about the party and tried to move directly from the insult to the contract like both were negotiable. I told him that an apology motivated by dependence is not an apology. It is simply another form of need. Ethan Cole slammed his hand on the table and demanded whether I understood how many jobs would be lost if we withdrew. He called my decision petty revenge and accused me of planning this collapse for years from some hidden place of bitterness. I said I had planned nothing except my own survival, and that his company had chosen to become dependent on mine. Vanessa Ashford said I should have told them who I was earlier, and that question almost amazed me. I asked when exactly I should have spoken, when they said I did not need education, or when they spread mental health rumors. Neither of them had an answer, because the truth is hard to answer when it has your exact voice. I told Victor Ashford something he needed to hear most. I would have kept the contract if the party had not happened. I said I had not come intending destruction, but his public cruelty made it impossible to pretend there was anything left to save. For a moment, he looked like he understood, and then pride came back and replaced recognition with threat. He asked what I wanted, still convinced every conflict was negotiable through leverage, money, or inheritance. I told him there was nothing he could give me because what I needed should have existed long before now. Then he tried his oldest weapon again, warning that if I walked away, I would receive no inheritance and no place in the family. I almost smiled because he was still trying to remove what he had already withheld for half my life. I said he had cut me off at 20, and no phantom promise of future money meant anything to me now. When he threatened lawyers and consequences, I reminded him every document had been reviewed, and every route had already been closed. I also told him that Amelia Carter, who represented my grandmother, had prepared for exactly this response from him. Then I revealed the trust, the $800,000, and the fact that Evelyn Ashford had protected me from them. Vanessa Ashford gasped when she realized Evelyn Ashford had seen through the family long before tonight. Victor Ashford said his mother had no right, and I told him it had been her money and her judgment. I stood up and told them the meeting was over because nothing useful remained once the truth was fully on the table. Before leaving, I gave them one final boundary in language even powerful people understand. Do not contact me again. I said that if they called, texted, appeared at my office, or kept smearing me, I would release everything I had. Every email, record, timeline, and legal document would make a fascinating story for the business press if I allowed it. My father rose slowly, suddenly looking like a man confronted with both age and consequence at the same time. Vanessa Ashford clutched her handbag like it could shield her from a reality no charm could reframe. Ethan Cole stared at me with something new in his eyes, and for the first time it was not contempt, but fear. He said this was not over, and I answered that it was, because I had already built the life they swore I could not. I told them I had done it without their help, their approval, or their permission, and I would keep doing it that way. Vanessa Ashford pleaded that we were family, and I answered that shared blood was not the same as shared love. I asked them to let me go, not as a request for mercy, but as a boundary I intended to enforce. At the door, Victor Ashford asked whether I really hated them that much, and I finally gave him the truth. I said I did not hate them at all. I simply did not need them anymore. And that was worse for him than hate. They walked through my lobby under the careful eyes of my employees and vanished behind the glass doors into their own consequences. I returned to my desk, opened my laptop, and got back to work because healing often looks ordinary from the outside. If you think that should have been the end, I once thought so too, but families like mine keep leaking truth. The fallout moved farther than I expected, into business circles, private history, and secrets buried long before I was old enough. When I set that boundary, I believed I was only protecting my peace, not collapsing the mythology around Victor Ashford. But truth has a wider blast radius than revenge, especially when hundreds of people already saw the opening crack. A week later, I got a call from someone I had not heard from in more than a decade. It was Samuel Ashford, my father's younger brother, the family's old black sheep, and the only artist among businessmen. His voice sounded older, rougher, and burdened with the kind of truth people carry too long before confessing. He said he knew about the party, the office meeting, and the contract, because news travels quickly in tight communities. Then he told me there was something I deserved to know, something he should have said years earlier but never did. I sat down before answering because his tone already felt heavier than gossip, scandal, or ordinary regret. What he revealed next changed not only my anger, but my entire understanding of what had been stolen from me. Samuel Ashford said that when my father claimed the family could not afford both my tuition and Ethan Cole's future, he lied. I told him I already suspected there had been enough money, but he said I still did not know the worst part. My mother, Sophia Ashford, had created a dedicated education fund for me before she died. It was enough to cover 4 full years at almost any school I could have chosen, with room to breathe. Then Samuel Ashford said the sentence that made the room tilt beneath me. Victor Ashford had drained it. He used my mother's fund to pay for Ethan Cole's MBA, then told me there was no money for my education. For a moment, I could not speak because some truths do not wound. They rearrange the entire map of your past. Samuel Ashford said Evelyn Ashford had discovered the theft, and that was why she later created the trust for me. She could not restore my mother's money, but she could stop Victor Ashford from stealing anything else from my future. I asked why no one had told me sooner, and he answered with the ugliest truth families often hide behind. He said they had all been afraid of Victor Ashford, and fear had turned them into silent accomplices. I did not absolve him for that silence, but I understood something important. My grandmother had known everything. Her letter suddenly deepened in meaning. When she wrote that she knew what they did, she meant all of it. After that call, my grief was no longer only about cruelty. It was about deliberate theft dressed as parental authority. 2 months after Meridian ended the contract, the first public consequences became impossible for Connecticut business circles to ignore. I was not stalking the story, but news like that travels fast when a powerful man's image begins to crack. Victor Ashford's company announced a 20% workforce reduction just before the holidays, and 70 people lost their jobs. The press release blamed market conditions and restructuring, but insiders understood the real damage had begun earlier. Their biggest consulting partner had walked away, and the gap could not be patched with panic, pride, or emergency meetings. Ethan Cole, barely months into the CEO role he had inherited, was already being questioned by the board. His vision for the future was collapsing under the weight of systems he never truly understood in the first place. Victor Ashford had to step out of retirement to help manage the crisis, shattering the triumphant ending he had staged. But the deeper injury was not operational. It was reputational. And reputation is the real oxygen of people like him. 200 guests had watched him mock his own daughter in public, and now whispers connected that scene to the company's decline. People began asking whether the woman he ridiculed was the same one whose firm had quietly kept his business alive. In Connecticut business circles, that kind of story spreads because it satisfies both moral judgment and private delight. I heard from a former colleague that Victor Ashford recently sat alone at an industry dinner where he once held court. No one wanted to be too close to the man who publicly diminished the daughter who had secretly strengthened his company. I expected to feel triumphant when I heard that, but what I actually felt was mostly exhaustion and distance. Evelyn Ashford had been right. Sometimes the truth is punishment enough, and you do not need to push it further. 6 months later, I sat in a therapist's office in Beacon Hill because survival is not the same thing as healing. Dr. Maya Patel asked why I had come, and I told her I was ready to stop living only in defense. She said I did not look like someone falling apart, and I answered that everyone deserves help before collapse. We talked about invisibility, about building success in silence, and about the strange grief of leaving people you needed. She asked whether I regretted what I had done, and I said no without hesitation, because the boundary had saved me. I regretted only that it had become necessary, not that I had finally protected myself from people who never would. Outside therapy, my life kept expanding in quieter, healthier directions than revenge ever could have given me. Meridian replaced the lost contract with 3 smaller clients, which made the company stronger, safer, and more balanced. I promoted Julian Cross, hired new employees, and moved us into a larger office facing the harbor. I started having monthly dinners with Samuel Ashford, who told me real stories about Sophia Ashford. He said my mother had been fierce, stubborn, and unwilling to surrender easily, and that some of her fire lived in me. I kept a framed photo of Evelyn Ashford on my desk and visited her grave once a month with flowers. At her headstone, I told her about the company, the office, the therapy, and the life her faith helped protect. One spring morning, standing there, I whispered that I had done it and had not let them define me. The cemetery wind moved through the trees, and for a second I could almost hear her say she had always known. That moment did not erase the past, but it softened something deep inside me that had long been braced for impact. Healing, I learned, is not dramatic most days. Sometimes it is simply a life that no longer revolves around proving anything. So here is what this story taught me. Your worth is not measured by a degree, a title, or your family's approval. Your worth is built in the unseen hours, in the discipline you keep when no one applauds and no one believes in you. It lives in what you create after rejection, in the self you assemble when others try to reduce you to failure. My father thought he was humiliating me at that retirement party, but what he actually did was cut the last chain. He believed he was putting me in my place, yet he accidentally opened the door I had needed for years. I do not hate my family, and that confuses many people because they mistake freedom for forgiveness or revenge for justice. Hate still ties you to the people who hurt you, and I refuse to keep spending my life on that chain. I would rather spend my energy on work I respect, relationships that nourish me, and a future no one can borrow. Boundaries are not revenge. Boundaries are protection. The line where your life begins and someone else's damage must stop. If your family makes you feel small or invisible, or foolish for wanting more, please hear me carefully now. Being underestimated does not mean you are empty, broken, or late. It sometimes means others lack the courage to see you. If you are the scapegoat, the disappointment, or the quiet one nobody invests in, I see you because I was you. There is life on the other side of walking away. And yes, it may feel like grief before it feels like freedom. But freedom comes, slowly and steadily, each time you stop negotiating with people who profit from your pain. Build anyway, learn anyway, leave when you must, and never confuse being unloved by them with being unworthy. Thank you for listening to this story and holding space for the parts of it that may feel familiar inside your own life. If this reminded you of your own boundaries, protect them. If it reminded you of your worth, keep choosing it every day. Remember this above all. You are not what they called you in anger, convenience, or fear, and you never truly were. You are larger than their version of you, stronger than their silence, and more capable than their judgment ever allowed. This is Claire Ashford. And after years of being erased, I finally chose myself and walked into a life that was mine. My advice to you is simple. Believe the truth of your own value early, and leave before cruelty convinces you to doubt it.